This petition recognizes that the Lord is vitally interested in our day-to-day living concerns. Now, we're going to tease out this morning several of the implications in this petition. Give us this day our daily bread. It's important to recognize that part of this prayer, I think, is grounded deeply in our recognition of our dependency upon God at all levels. I'm reminded time and again when we have spent a wonderful time with our new granddaughter what dependency looks like. There's very little that she can do for herself. So dependent on everything, all the way from clothes being put on, the milk that she is nurtured on, diapers being changed, every single thing she is dependent on. We often forget that as we grow up and mature. We think that we are self-sufficient, we can do everything for ourselves, but what we forget is how dependent we still are, and we're dependent on God. Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 8. This verse is one that I had known for a long time, but someone sent it to me a week or two ahead, reminding me of this verse, and it goes so well with our lesson this morning, we need to hear it. Proverbs 30, verse 8. He says, "Keep falsehood and lies from me, O God. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread." So here are two fundamental petitions: keep and give. And with these, just enough daily bread so that two things can be removed from our lives. First, either poverty, which has with it the temptation to steal, or riches, which has with it the temptation for self-sufficiency. Both are just as sinful and spiritually damaging. This part of what we call the Lord's Prayer reminds us and teaches us that the daily stuff of our living is part of not only our prayer life, but part of what God is vitally concerned with. There's nothing so personal, and we need to emphasize this, there's nothing so personal in our life, but what God is concerned about and rejoices when we share that with Him in prayer. We need to know that when we go to God in prayer, it's not presumptuous to ask God. This is the essence of the confidence that we have as Christians. In the book of Hebrews, and this is a wonderful lesson in and of itself, we don't have time to trace it down, but all through the book of Hebrews, there is this confidence that we have in our standing before God because of what Christ has already done for us. And that confidence comes together with our prayer life. Listen to Hebrews 4:10. "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." It is right. We have the right to go before the throne of God with this kind of confidence when asking for our daily bread. Let's talk a moment about asking for our daily bread, because we don't often think about that. We have so much of our daily bread, don't we? We live in a country that is full of daily bread in all of its expressions of food enough to eat. And yet, in every community and in every state, there are those who don't have enough to eat for various reasons. Some family, others systemic reasons. But because of that, we have, and we're like a lot of churches, we have ministries that reach out to those who need food. But those of us who have never known a hungry day, and we have enough, we tend to forget where our enough came from. God is the source. He gives us more than we can ever imagine. When I thought of an illustration I wanted to give, because it has to do with bread. When we were working with a church in Lansing, Michigan, Nancy and I knew a gentleman by the name of Ed Tarrant. Ed was one of these natural comics. You loved to be around him, but you never knew what joke he was going to pull on you next. Just a really wonderful person to be around. He told me a story one day that I wasn't there, but every time I think of it, I can't get it out of my mind. He was a contractor by work, and he had his own dump truck. Well, he lived way on the north side of Lansing, and one day he got a call from a local bakery. It's no longer in existence there now, but a few years ago, they had something go wrong with the ingredients that they were making all these thousands and thousands of loaves every day. They had to get rid of the dough. And apparently somebody at the plant got the idea. If they could call up all the farmers in the area on the north side of Lansing, they could come and get that dough and feed it to their pigs. I didn't know if pigs like dough or not, but that's what he told me. So he said he remembered pulling his dump truck up to the bakery, and they had some sort of machine where they put all that dough in the back of his dump truck. And he was headed toward the farm with it. And he said it was in the summer. And he said he noticed as he was headed toward his home that people that were going by the other way had their hands out the window laughing and pointing and everything. He said, I didn't know what happened. And he says, I was still driving toward home. All of a sudden, I could see coming over the windshield this big doe. And he said, I had to pull the truck over to the side and had to pull it so I could see how to drive to get home with this truck full of dough. And every time I think of dough rising, I think of Ed and his dump truck and what that must have looked like to see all that dough. But and also I think about when you think of abundance and you think of what God has given us, it's that kind of overflowing thing. And so it is a challenge for us to pray this kind of prayer. Give us our daily bread. Let's start with the petition itself. Give us our daily bread. I believe that this comes out of, it's rooted in the tradition of the petitionary Psalms. If indeed Matthew is writing to Jewish Christians, they would have been deeply steeped within the tradition of those Psalms that ask. There's a ton of petition Psalms. God, give us safety. God, we're your children, care for us. So many petitions. This petition itself, give. It recognizes that we're dependent on and we believe very deeply God's willingness and ability to provide what we need. From the very beginning, God's given us what we need. Listen to Genesis 1:29. God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree that has fruit seed in it. They will be your food. From the very beginning, God has provided. From the very beginning, He's given us seed-bearing plant and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. Genesis 28:20, you may remember this episode in the life of Jacob where he made a vow saying, if God will be with me and He'll watch over me in my journey, then I am sure that He will give me food to eat and clothes to wear. When you look at Jacob in this part of Genesis, all the way from the time where he sets up a little celebration stone at Bethel, God has helped me. On another occasion where he wrestles with God, he is confident that at every step of the way, God provides for him. John chapter 4, verse 10. In the Gospel of John, Jesus makes some claims about who He is. This is one of the neat things that interests me about Jesus is His own claims. Jesus claims to be not only the water of life, but the bread of life. I am the bread of life. The early church heard that in some pretty powerful tones. Not only was it just daily bread that you can eat in response to this particular petition, but we're going to see in a little bit later that it was a belief Jesus is this divine bread of life given for the soul. We petition the Father to give us what we need. We don't petition a stranger. See, think of how it would sound if we believed that God was a stranger and you really didn't have a right to go there to ask, but we went anyway. It would sound so different. Romans 15:5. Paul picks up on this awareness that it is his Father. He says, may the God who gives endurance and encouragement give you the same attitude of mind toward each other that Christ Jesus had. Paul was constantly aware, God, the one who gives. He is our Father. So this petition to give, it reminds me of the woman at the well. She comes to Jesus, and after he is explaining to her what this living water is, sir, could you give me this so that I wouldn't thirst anymore? Everything we need has been given to us through Jesus. The second thing is the concern for this day. In Matthew 6:34, there's a passage that we need to be reminded of over and over and over. I need it. Listen to this. Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Have you discovered that each day has enough trouble of its own? Yes. You don't need to borrow interest on tomorrow's problems. It helps us not to worry about tomorrow. So consequently, we learn how to trust for today. Lord, this day. Genesis chapter 22, verse 14, when Abraham learned that he didn't have to go ahead and sacrifice Isaac, his son. And Abraham learned that at the it's interesting, the different names in the Old Testament about God are always connected with some event. So that what you have is not just a name to identify who God is, but it identifies what God does. And these two things are brought together. So Abraham learns the Lord will provide. And in some Bibles, the Lord will provide, those are all in capital letters because that is a name in Hebrew. To this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The Lord will provide. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 7. God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he did. A long time later, he spoke through David and said, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. So today, this day, it's interesting, the urgency. This day. We respond today. We hear his voice today. He hears our voice today. Here's what James says about all of this. We can't boast about tomorrow. We only have today. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we'll go to this city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then it just vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. And as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. So if anyone then who knows how to do the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. Now what is that good? Very important. Don't pull that verse out and say, well, I knew I should have done so-and-so and I didn't do it, so it's sin. No, that's not what he's talking about. The good within this paragraph is the intentional willingness that when you make plans, God is directly and intentionally referred to as being part of those plans, if the Lord wills. That's how a Christian thinks. If the Lord wills. Number 3 is the provision of this daily bread. You know, it's hard for us to imagine going to the marketplace every day for either grain itself to make our own bread, which a lot of people did, or to even buy bread. It's fascinating to realize that God is interested in every aspect of our life as something so mundane as the bread that we eat, whether or not we have enough to eat. Luke says, give us each day in this particular petition, recognizing this ongoing provision. Job 23, verses 10 through 12. Listen to what Job says. He knows the way that I take. When he tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I've kept to his way without turning aside. I've not departed from the commands of his lips. And notice this, I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. This is very important, because what disciples of Jesus recognize is that even more than our physical body being provided with bread, and bread becomes symbolic for the food that we need to survive, there is another kind of daily bread. And we'll come to that in just a second. Psalm 27:35. Here's what David says. I was young and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. Now, I don't know how you would word that in your own life, but I suspect most of us have seen that that is true. That God has taken care of us and our family, and everywhere that we've been able to look, we have seen his faithful care. The Bible, and especially the New Testament, moves from the physical bread to the spiritual bread. I remember years ago, and some of you may still remember, I think it's still published, there used to be a daily devotional called Daily Bread. John 6:35, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. That's on a deep spiritual level. There's a hunger inside of us that goes way beyond physical bread. There's a hunger inside of us that only Jesus can quench and fulfill. I have my own favorite daily bread. And it was years before I even thought of giving God thanks for his divine provision as I was pulling my favorite bread off of the shelf in the store. I mean, I had grown up hearing this prayer, you have too, but for some reason in my own little brain, I never made the connection that when I'm pulling the loaf off the shelf, God, thank you for providing this bread as I'm putting it in my basket. Now that may sound mundane and it may sound simple, but it is powerful. Just think about this. God gives us the ability to stand up and have the power to reach up and pull the bread off the shelf, because there's some people that can't. You ever been shopping when someone is in a cart and they're in one of those motorized carts and you have to pull things off the higher shelf for them? One time I went shopping like that. Couldn't stand on my foot, had a shot in my foot, and Nancy said, well, why don't you get one of those? No, I'm not going to get one of those carts. That's for people that are crippled. And she looked, you're crippled. So I got one of the, it's amazing. I don't know if you've ever ridden one. I mean, I wouldn't advise doing it if you don't have to, but when you're in one of those carts, you begin to realize how helpless you are. It's anything up above you, somebody has to pull it down for you. And so just the ability to walk in the store and pull that bread off the shelf, God, thank you that you have given the ability to do that, but even more so, you're providing the bread. In this petition, give us our daily bread, we're actually saying things like this, and here's how I want to end the lesson. And I want you to think of these very carefully, and you might word a couple of these differently, but I think this is very powerful and it gets to the core of this petition. Lord, thank you for giving me my daily bread. Lord, I realize just how dependent I am on you. Lord, give me just enough so I'll not be tempted by the snares of either poverty or riches. Lord, as my loving Father, you give me so much more than just my daily food. Lord, because I believe you provide, help me not to worry anymore. And Lord, because you provide everything I need, there's no room for boasting or self-congratulation on what I think I've gotten for myself and what I've gained. And last of all, Lord, let my daily bread remind me of your divine daily bread, the very words of Jesus. Maybe this morning you sense a deep hunger in your soul for the divine daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Physical and spiritual together. It is amazing. God is the giver of both. And we as His people can benefit from that gift. If you need to come to Jesus Christ as the bread of life, surrender your heart and your life to Him. And as you do that, knowing that you're changing your heart and your life, called repentance, that you believe He is the resurrected Savior, that you're confessing Him as Lord of your life, and to be buried with Him in waters of baptism, not only to receive remission of sin, but also the imparting of His Spirit. That Spirit dwells in you, so that now you can have that inward emptiness of the soul filled by the bread of life. If you need to come and partake of that divine bread of life, won't you come right now while we stand and sing?